That would really be tough. That would really be bad, man. Speaking of things that are really bad, we're ready for chapter 11 of 2 Samuel. And from here on out, the story of David and his family get pretty rough. The story of David's family is pretty rough. And it really starts here in chapter 11 of 2 Samuel. There's two stories of David that are the most well-known to people who have never really taken the time to study these books. The two stories that almost everybody knows if they have any knowledge of who David was. David and Goliath is the one that everybody sort of knows. At least people used to at least kind of be aware of that story. Matter of fact, they still, in sports, they talk about when even in like the March Madness, when a number 1 seed is playing the number 16 seed, they say, well, it's a real David and Goliath story here, and people, I hope, still understand the reference. What does that even mean, a David and Goliath story? A big, powerful person versus a small, supposedly insignificant or weak person. So almost everybody knows the David and Goliath story. As people, frankly, in our culture lose more and more biblical literacy, a lot of literature is chock full of biblical references that everybody used to kind of know, people knew Adam and Eve, people knew the flood story, people knew who David was, people knew who Jonah was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we take for granted, well, yeah, everybody knows those stories. They don't. I heard, this wasn't a joke. I heard about a little boy who his parents decided to send him to a Catholic school, mainly for the academics, not because they had any loyalty to Catholicism. And the little boy, who was like 6, 7 years old, he walked in and said, "Why is that man on the plus sign?" He had no exposure at all to what a cross was or who Jesus was or anything like that. And you think about a book like Moby Dick, Call Me Ishmael. Well, how many people know who Ishmael is anymore? Everybody used to know who Ishmael is. Now it's a biblical reference. Now a lot of people would not know who Ishmael is. So all that to say, if the people know any story about David, they probably know David and Goliath. If they know two stories about David, the other one is David and Bathsheba. That's the other best known story of David, is chapter 11 of 2 Samuel, David and Bathsheba. So let's look at it. And, because we know how it ends so badly, it's kind of like walking into a dark hall, because it's just, this is not good. In the spring, this is 2 Samuel 11, verse 1. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Ramah. But David remained in Jerusalem. And this is significant because David has always been, the mighty warrior. David, Saul slayed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. The king was the great warrior. But now he's getting older. And he's not a young man anymore. And he's no longer actually out there leading the troops into battle. He's sending the troops out into battle instead of leading the troops into battle, which is understandable as you get older. But the fact that the troops are out there and he's still in Jerusalem is of course significant. One evening, David got up from his bed, walked around on the roof of the palace. He's apparently restless, sleepless, and the roof of his house, we say palace, the king's house would not be palatial in our imagination. It would be the nicest house in town, but it would still just be a house with a flat roof. And that's the roof of the house, which was a flat roof, was a place where people would go to cool off. It was like a porch almost, a big porch. That's where you went up onto the roof sometimes. It's not unusual that he went up on the roof. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. because his roof is a taller roof than the other roofs, so he could look down across the other houses. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. Again, in the middle of the night. She's probably not thinking anybody from a really tall vantage point is going to see her. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. And the man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Uriah is one of David's mercenary soldiers. Matter of fact, when it lists in an earlier chapter, it lists the names of some of his so-called mighty men, his SEAL Team 6, his most experienced warriors. One of the names listed there is Uriah, and Uriah is a Hittite. He is not a native of Israel. He is a mercenary who's been adopted into the Israeli army. David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Obviously, she has no choice in this matter. It's not like, would you like to go see the king? Would you like to go have sex with the king? No, she has no choice in any of this. King sends men to get her and bring her to the king. So nothing in this is her choice. She had purified herself from her uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, "I'm pregnant." Obviously, this is telescoped. A month or two or whatever goes by, and she sends word to him that she's pregnant. So David sent word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." Remember, the men are off fighting against the Ammonites and besieging one of their towns, because in the springtime you could go into warfare. Sometimes when it's rainy, and other times it was not the good time to stage an attack, a siege of a city. But they're out there attacking a city. So he sends for Uriah. Joab sent him to David. And Uriah came to him, and David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, how the war was going. Give me a report on how's it going up at the front. How are things at the front lines? How's the morale of the men? Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." Now, here's one of those little pearls that I learned in seminary from a Hebrew professor. Wash your feet in Hebrew is a euphemism for sex. It is understood to mean, it's the way of saying, it's like saying, I don't know, a woman saying, "I'm going to go powder my nose." Well, she's not really going to go powder her nose. Or maybe she is, but that's not why she's leaving the table. It's a euphemism for something else she's going to do. Wash your feet meant, why don't you go see your wife and have sex? So Uriah left the palace. Now, why would he do that? Why would David do that? Right, to cover up the pregnancy. If he can get Uriah to sleep with Bathsheba, the baby might be a little premature, but he'd still think it's his child. So David wants Uriah to go sleep with his wife to cover up his adultery, so that Uriah will, when she shows up pregnant, he will assume, that night I came home from the front is when she got pregnant. So he sends him home with basically telling him, "Yeah, you're home. Go sleep with your wife." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with his master's servants and did not go down to his house. He doesn't go. He sleeps there at David's palace with David's servants. When David was told Uriah did not go home, he asked him, "Haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home?" In other words, he's saying, it's been I'm giving you permission. You have been away from your wife. I would think that's what you would want to, have some time with her. What's wrong with you? Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open fields. How can I go to my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as I live, I will not do such a thing. I can't go have fun while my buddies are there sleeping in the mud. I can't go enjoy myself while the rest of the men are out there in the middle of a battle. It's just not right. I can't show up and tell them how I had this great, leave, and they're all going to say, I can't do it. I can't do that to my buddies up at the front." Uriah said to David, all that, "I won't do such a thing." Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I'll send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. This is David attempt number 2 to get him to go to his house and sleep with his wife. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among the master's servants. He did not go home. So 2 nights in a row, David tries to cover his tracks by sending him to his house. The second time, getting him drunk, thinking that'll loosen up his inhibitions about his guys. Still doesn't work. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, that's commander of the army, and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, "Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he'll be struck down and die." He writes a letter of instruction to his general, seals it up, with a wax seal, like they would do, wax and a signet ring, seals up the letter, hands Uriah the letter and say, "Give this to Joab when you get back to the front." And Joab goes and is delivering his own death warrant. Uriah is now delivering the command that he be killed. So when Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. So, Uriah and some of the other men are at the very front of the line. They're besieging a city, a walled city. And, in those days, and some things haven't changed, didn't really change for centuries. If you're the attacker and the enemy has the high ground on a wall, what are the enemy on the high ground going to be doing? Shooting down. It's going to be men on the wall of the city shooting arrows down at those who are trying to break down the wall or break down the gates. So the men who are at the very front are going to be the prime targets to be shot with arrows. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king the account of this battle," this battle goes poorly for the Israelites. They lose men and they do not succeed in the siege of the enemy. "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may say, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Zerubbabel? Didn't a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall?'" He says, if David says, "Why did you get so close to the wall where you were going to get guys killed?" If he asks you this, then say to him, "Also, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." If David gets all upset about the battle going poorly and he starts to be angry about it, just throw in this little bit of information. One of the men killed was Uriah. So, 22. The messenger set out. And when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, the men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. In other words, he doesn't wait for David to be mad. He doesn't wait for David to say, why did you go so close to the wall? He's afraid of David's anger. So before David has even a chance to react, he throws in what Joab told him to say. And one of the men killed was Uriah the Hittite. So David told the messenger, say this to Joab. Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. Oh, well, these things happen. He doesn't seem that upset, does he? He doesn't seem that upset that his men were killed. Oh, well, the sword devours one as well as another. Tell Joab, well, we'll get him. We'll get him next time. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But then there's this sentence. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. Because David is thinking, okay, no harm, no foul. No one will ever know. She'll have the child. Everybody will assume it's mine. Only Joab knows the real story. He's my nephew and my loyal general. I've gotten away with it. But he hasn't gotten away with it, because even though he said, well, nobody knows, God knows. And Nathan, the prophet, speaks to David a word from God. But he does it in a very clever way. Chapter 12. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food and drank from his cup and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. He presents this as a story for David to now judge, as a judge. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity. And then Nathan said to David, you are the man. Nathan said to David, you are the man. Now, there's not that many parables in the Old Testament. We think about Jesus as the one who is primarily known for telling parables to make a point. But here Nathan tells a parable, but David doesn't realize it's a parable. He takes it as an actual case study. And his anger at this man being so merciless and hard, and this man who had everything, doing this to a man who had so little, this man deserves to die. Well, that man is you, David. You're the man. Then Nathan said to David. Now, this shows something about Nathan, because in many a place, in many a time, not just 2,000 years or 3,000 years ago, but much even more recently, if an advisor, a prophet, any other kind of court person had come to a king and done that and said, "You're the man," the king would have said, "Well, guess what? You're dead." The king would have just said, "Well, no one was ever going to hear your little story, because I'm going to have you sent to the gallows right now." Many a king would say, "How dare you challenge me? You're a dead man." But David, in the middle of being a total, awful person, David doesn't do that. David doesn't order Nathan to be executed. So Nathan says to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." David broke 3 of the 10 commandments. He coveted his neighbor's wife, he committed adultery, and he committed murder. So he breaks 3 of the 10 commandments in this episode. Verse 11, this is what the Lord says, "Out of your own household I'm going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret. I'll do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel." So the message is, David is going to have lots of trouble in his own family. David is going to have lots and lots and lots of trouble from his own family. And again, to David's credit, he says, verse 13, David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." He doesn't deny it. He doesn't say, but. He confesses. He says, basically, "You're right." Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin." In other words, you have confessed your sin and you find mercy and forgiveness. But you're not going to die. Because he had pronounced sentence in the story. The man who did this deserves to die. And he's the man. "But because by doing this you've made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt, the son born to you will die." So Bathsheba's baby is going to die. And after Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child, and as many would point out, especially in this culture, this is not a punishment for the child or for Bathsheba. This is a punishment for David. This is a punishment. This is the natural punishment for him for his sin. In this case, and again, don't read too much. This is not a, never, 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 Jesus would certainly count it. Never, never say if somebody has a child die, the parents are not being punished. That is not the lesson from this. This is a unique case of someone that was God's anointed king, placed in a position of, he is the judge, he is the moral authority, he is the one who is to enforce God's laws, he is the one who is to bring justice to the nation. This is a special case. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and went into his house and spent nights lying on the ground. The elders of the household stood beside him to get him up from the ground. He refused. He wouldn't eat any food with them. On the seventh day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, while the child was still living, we spoke to David, and he wouldn't listen to us. How can we tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. In other words, we're afraid he's going to kill himself. David noticed that his servants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead, he asked? Yes, they replied, he's dead. David got up from the ground after he had washed, put on lotions, changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. He went to his own house, and at his request, they served him food, and he ate. His servants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. Now the child is dead, you get up and eat? He has reversed the normal. Normally, the fasting and the not eating in the morning is after a death, not before a death. He answered, while the child was still alive, I fasted and I wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he's dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I'll go to him. He won't return to me. So David's arrogance, David's ruthlessness, David's sin, because of the position that he was in. He was not just some normal fellow. He was the anointed one of God who had been richly blessed by God. And now God says, why do you hate me? So, it says, verse 24, David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and lay with her. And she gave him birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him, and because the Lord loved him, he sent word through Nathan, the prophet, to name him Jedediah. Now, Jedediah means loved by the Lord. It's not a very popular name anymore. Sometimes in really old westerns, somebody is named Jedediah. The name Solomon, or in Hebrew is Shlomo, is just a form of the word shalom. So Solomon's name is the same as the word shalom. It means peace. So Bathsheba has another child by David, and this one is named Peace, Shlomo, Solomon. And his nickname is Jedediah. Now, let me stop there for a minute. I mean, I don't know, you probably knew some of the parts of this story, but maybe you never really read the whole thing and heard exactly how it played out. Any questions or thoughts or reservations, or how does this story land with you? Huh? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I think that's the difference between, forgiveness does not always mean there are no consequences. Forgiveness does not always mean consequences go away. I always said, if somebody, not to pick out any one sin. Let's say somebody, somebody, has a life of drugs and alcohol, and that causes them to do all kinds of unsavory things. And they get clean, and they ask, for forgiveness for the people that they've injured because of that, and all kinds of things. But their health may still be compromised. The drugs and the alcohol have still done a job on their anatomy. I mean, there are still consequences to sometimes behavior. Forgiveness doesn't always mean the consequences go away. I mean, there's been lots of people who go to prison, and because of a prison ministry, they become Christians in prison. The prison doesn't go, oh, well, okay, you can leave now. They don't. They still have to live out their sentence in the jail. It doesn't mean that the consequences go away. One of the more famous persons who, became a Christian in prison is Chuck Colson. I don't know if you remember. Some of you are old enough. He was one of Richard Nixon's henchmen and was the so-called hatchet man of the Nixon administration. It was said he would murder his own mother for Nixon, et cetera, et cetera. And he went to prison as part of the Watergate scandal and became a Christian in prison. And became a changed man, but he still had to live out his sentence. I mean, they didn't let him go and then he started what was called prison fellowship. He started a Christian ministry to prisons because of that. But, and was a very different person after that. But the consequences didn't just go away. So the consequences are, and you can look at this as one of the consequences of this, as we're going to see, is the rebellion of David's sons. But you're going to see in David's sons a lot of David's own personality traits. A sense of entitlement, a sense of selfishness. I mean, when David sins for Bathsheba, sleeps with her and then sends her away, it's like, well, I'm the king. Everything in the kingdom is mine. I mean, no thought for her or her husband. It was just, he only thought of his own lust. I mean, this idea of entitlement, and the old saying, which sadly is true, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. All those things, I mean, David is I talked about how Saul was a great warrior but not a very good king. David is a great warrior and a good king. He's not a good father. He's a great warrior. He's a great king. He's a lousy father. And we're going to see just how bad a father he is as we go forward here. So, meanwhile, verse 12:26, meanwhile, Joab fought against Rabbah of the Ammonites, captured the royal citadel. Joab sent messengers to David saying, I have fought against Rabbah and taken its water supply. Now muster the rest of the troops and besiege the city and capture it. Otherwise, I will take the city and it'll be named after me. Joab has some ambition. David mustered the entire army, went to Rabbah, attacked and captured it. He took the crown from the head of the king, of their king. Its weight was a talent of gold. That's about 75 pounds. That's pretty heavy on your head. It was set with precious stones. It was placed on David's head. He took a great quantity of plunder from the city. He brought out the people who were there, consigning them to labor with saws and iron picks and axes, made them work at brick making. Again, gosh, a little irony there. What were the Hebrew slaves forced to do in Egypt? Make bricks, right? He did this to all the Ammonite towns, and David and his entire army returned to Jerusalem. So David continues to expand his territory because he's an effective leader, he's an effective king, he's an effective war king, and he's doing well, expanding his territory. Things are going well for him as a commander of the army, as the king of the nation. Things not going so well in his own family. And again, the next chapter is even worse than the Bathsheba story. It's not as well known. The next chapter is even worse. story of Amnon and Tamar. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. In other words, Amnon falls in love with his half-sister. Okay? Amnon falls in love with his half-sister. David has sons, remember, by multiple women. So, Amnon and Absalom are both David's sons, but they have different mothers. And Amnon is the oldest son, but it says he fell in love with his half-sister Tamar, who was Absalom's full sister. And fell in love, I think, is a misnomer there. Fell in lust, you're going to see, is a better explanation. He fell in lust with her, not in love. Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her, because you were not allowed to marry your sister, even if she was a half-sister. Now, Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, son of Shemaiah, David's brother. So in other words, his was a cousin. And Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, why do you, the king's son, not just the king's son, but the crown prince, the first in line, the eldest of David's sons, why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Why won't you tell me? Amnon said to him, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, in other words, David, say to him, I'd like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, I'd like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight so I may eat from her hand. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. She took the pan, served him the bread, but he refused to eat. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said, so everyone left them. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom, so I may eat it from your hand. And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it for him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. Don't, my brother, she said to him. Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? What about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please, speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you, which she's desperate at this point, even though it's illegal. She's saying, but he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he loved her. Amnon said to her, get up and get out. No, she said to him, sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you've already done to me. But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, get this woman out of here and bolt the door after her. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing a richly ornamented robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornamented robe she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, has that Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet now, my sister. He's your brother. Don't take this thing to heart. And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. When King David heard of this, he was furious. Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. It's probably one of the worst stories in the Bible. I mean, as in one of the most repelling stories, that this prince lusts after his half-sister, tricks her into his bedroom, rapes her, and then sends her away, tells her to get out of his sight, which now she is now ruined. She's no longer a virgin. She's going to live as unmarried, unable to have children for the rest of her life in her brother's house. So he's ruined her life. Not just raped her, which is, of course, a horrible thing, but basically ruined her entire life now. And her full brother, Absalom, it says, David heard about this and was furious. Does he do anything about it? No. David doesn't do anything about it. He's mad about it, but he doesn't do anything. Absalom, Tamar's full brother, is full of hatred for Amnon. But he doesn't say anything to him, good or bad, because Absalom is playing now the long game. Absalom is now saying, I will have revenge on him, but I have to be clever about it. I have to be clever about how I'm going to kill my brother. I can't do it hastily. I can't do it when there's a lot of people around me who could stop me. I have to come up with a plan. I have to play the long game. The next verse. 2 years later, so he bides his time for 2 years. When Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal Hazor, near the border of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. This is a sheep shearing is a kind of a feast time. A sheep shearing was a time for celebration and feasting. Absalom went to the king and said, your servant has his shearers come. Will the king and his officials please join me? No, my son, the king replied, all of us should not go. We would only be a burden to you. Although Absalom urged him, he still refused to go, but he gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, well, if not, Dad, if you're not going to come, if not, let my brother Amnon come with us. The king asked him, why should he go with you? But Absalom urged him, so he sent with him Amnon and the rest of the king's sons. Absalom ordered his men, listen, when Amnon is in high spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Have not I given you this order? Be strong and brave. So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. So Absalom's men murder Amnon at the feast. And Absalom gets his revenge. Then all the king's other sons got up, mounted their mules, and fled, thinking, are we next? All the other sons run away after Absalom has his older brother, half-brother, killed. While they were on their way, the report came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons. Not one of them is left. Is that true? No. The king stood up, tore his clothes, and lay down on the ground, and all of his servants stood by with their clothes torn. David has been told all of his sons have been murdered by Absalom. But Jonadab, son of Shemaiah, David's brother, said, my lord should not think that they killed all the princes. Only Amnon is dead. This has been Absalom's expressed intention ever since the day Amnon raped his sister Tamar. My lord and king should not be concerned about the report that all the king's sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead. Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. What did Nathan say was going to be a part of David's household? Yeah. He said back in 12:10, "Now therefore the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite." The sword will never depart your house. So now, the oldest son is dead after having raped his half-sister. Absalom, who, if you look at the lineup of David's sons, in the birth order, Absalom is actually listed as third, but the one who was in between Amnon and Absalom is never mentioned again. So we assume he died. We assume Absalom is now next in line, because the second son is never mentioned again. So he probably is dead. So the eldest son, Amnon, is now dead. And Absalom, who would be apparently next in line, is the murderer. Now, the man standing watch looked up and saw many people on the road west of him coming down the side of the hill. The watchman went and told the king, "I see men in the direction of Horonaim on the side of the hill." And Jonadab said to the king, "See, the king's sons are here. It's happened just as your servant said." As he finished speaking, the king's sons came in wailing loudly. The king too and all of his servants wept very bitterly. Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Amminahud, the king of Geshur, which, if we look up the genealogy, Absalom's mothers came from there. Remember, these royal marriages were consolidating political alliances. So Absalom goes to where his grandfather lives. But King David mourned for his son every day. After Absalom fled and went to Geshur, he stayed there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death. So, when Amnon raped Tamar, David was mad, but he did nothing. But Absalom plotted and schemed and finally achieved his revenge and had Amnon killed. Now he's a murderer, and he flees the country to his grandfather's neighboring small kingdom. And he's gone for 3 years. And over the 3 years, David apparently was very close to Absalom, because it says, he longed to go to Absalom. In other words, he's really missing his son Absalom. So now we got a pretty good mess here. Now, Joab is in the middle of all this, because now the succession is really muddy. Amnon was first in line. Joab's already thinking, well, who becomes king when David dies? Everyone assumed it would be Amnon. Well, that's not going to happen. Well, Absalom's next in line, but now he's a murderer in exile. And it's like, where's the line of succession here? And Joab apparently is very concerned about the line of succession. About because remember, Joab is younger than David. He's his nephew. He's thinking, where's the continuity in all this? Because David was promised his throne is going to last, an everlasting throne. There's got to be somebody in line, a crown prince, but that's all in disarray now because of this huge mess. So Joab, chapter 14, Joab, son of Jeriah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa and had a wise woman brought from there. He said to her, "Pretend you are in mourning. Dress in mourning clothes, and don't use any cosmetic lotions. Act like a woman who has spent many days grieving for the dead. Then go to the king and speak these words to him." And Joab put the words in her mouth. Okay. So now, instead of the prophet Nathan telling David a parable, but presenting it as a real case about a rich man who, instead of killing one of his own hundreds of sheep, took the one little lamb from the poor guy and he butchered it for a feast for his neighbors. That was a parable, but it was presented as a real-life case study. Joab finds a wise woman, one who is going to be skilled at being an actress, to go, and he tells her, here's the story you are to spin for the king, and you are to pretend you are a widow in mourning. And he told her what story to tell David, which is also now going to have the same. It's going to be a parable that is meant to move David to do something, just like the other parable that Nathan told him. So here the woman comes to David. The woman from Tekoa went to the king. She fell on her face to the ground to pay him honor, and she said, "Help me, O king." The king asked her, "What's troubling you?" She said, "I am indeed a widow. My husband's dead. I, your servant, had 2 sons. They got into a fight with each other in the field, and no one was there to separate them. One struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant. They say, 'Hand over the one who struck his brother down, so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed. Then we'll get rid of the heir as well.' They would put out the only burning coal I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth." Okay, do you understand her problem here? Her supposed problem. She's a widow. She has 2 sons. One of the sons, they get in a fight. One son kills the other son. Now, all that's left is the murdering son. The clan says, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life, death penalty. He needs to die for murdering his brother. She's saying, if they murder him, I'm left with no children, and a distant male relative will get all of my property, because a woman could not inherit the land. So she says, if they kill my other son, not only will I lose both my sons, but I'll lose all my property, because it will pass on to the closest, uncle or cousin or closest male relative. So she goes to the king, pleading for him to do something about this situation. The king, David, said to the woman, "Go home, and I'll issue an order in your behalf." But the woman from Tekoa said to him, "My lord the king, let the blame rest on me and on my father's family. Let the king and his throne be without guilt." The king replied, "If anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he'll not bother you again." She said, "Let the king invoke the Lord his God to prevent the avenger of blood from adding to the destruction, so that my son will not be destroyed." "As surely as the king lives," he said, "not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground." She's piling it on pretty thick here. And she gets him to swear, this other son will not be harmed. Then the woman said, "Let your servant speak a word to my lord the king." "Speak," he replied. The woman said, "Why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, does he not convict himself? For the king has not brought back his banished son. Like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways so that a banished person may not remain estranged from him. And now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. Your servant thought, I will speak to the king. Perhaps he will do what his servant asked. Perhaps the king will agree to deliver his servant from the hand of the man who is trying to cut off both me and my son from the inheritance God gave us. And now your servant says, may the word of my lord the king bring me rest. For my lord the king is like an angel of God in discerning good and evil. May the Lord your God be with you. Now, she is drawing an analogy here. She's like, if they kill, this fictional story of hers, if they kill my other son, I will lose everything. If you don't bring back your son, the nation will be deprived of the next king. If you don't allow your son, Absalom, to come back from banishment, you are robbing all of your people of their next king, and we will be without a ruler. She's trying to make her story convince him to bring Absalom out of banishment. She's trying to say that her story is like the situation, one son killed the other son. Well, yes, Absalom killed his brother, just like in her story. But she's saying, even though the law might demand vengeance on Absalom for killing his brother, you, as the king, need to take the welfare of the whole kingdom into account and bring him back, that he might be here ready to take over for you. And David, you are so wise in your voice. You're like an angel, and you know justice. And she's pouring it on thick. And David smells a rat. The king said to the woman, "Don't keep from me the answer I'm going to ask you." "Let my lord the king speak," the woman said. The king asked, "Isn't the hand of Joab with you in all of this?" In other words, this time David figures out where this is all coming from. He unlike when Nathan went, "You are the man," and David's like, "Oh," Here David's like, "Did Joab put you up to this? Did Joab make you say, 'Come to me'? Is this all a plot of Joab?" The woman answered, "As surely as you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or the left from anything my lord the king says." In other words, boy, you're so smart, nobody can pull one over on you. "Yes, it was your servant Joab who instructed me to do this, and who put all these words into the mouth of your servant. Your servant Joab did this to change the present situation. My lord has wisdom like that of an angel of God. He knows everything that happens in the land." The king said to Joab, "Very well, I'll do it. Go bring back the young man Absalom." So it works. And David agrees that Absalom can come back from exile, and he can come home and not face death for killing his brother. Joab fell with his face to the ground to pay him honor, and he blessed the king. And Joab said, "Today your servant knows that he has found favor in your eyes, my lord the king, because the king has granted his servant's request." So, Joab, again, you can say, well, how selfish is Joab this? Is Joab looking for his own? Is he saying, I need to make sure whenever you do die, David, that I'm in the right place with the right person? I mean, is Joab just looking out for his own welfare? Is he truly concerned about the succession, that if he doesn't bring Absalom back when David dies, it's going to be bloody and messy with no clear successor? But he says, "Oh, you trust me, you trust me." So Joab, verse 23, Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, "He must go to his own house. He must not see my face." So Absalom went to his own house and did not see the face of the king. In other words, he cannot come to court. He cannot come to the palace. He can come back to Jerusalem, but he can't come to see me. He doesn't have to stay in exile, but he has to stay in his own house. So it's kind of a halfway, he's not all the way back into his good graces, but he's kind of halfway back. So he must not see my face. So Absalom went to his own house and didn't see the face of the king. Now, we're told for the first time a little bit about Absalom. Verse 25. In all of Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. Whenever he cut the hair of his head, he used to cut his hair from time to time when it became too heavy for him, He would weigh it, and its weight was 200 shekels by the royal standard, which is about 5 pounds of hair. So, he is a gorgeous man, a handsome man. Who else was so good looking? Saul. Yeah, Saul was so good looking. I mean, David was supposed to be such ruddy, at least the English translation of it. David was supposed to be not ugly. I don't think he's ever presented as being, as handsome as all this. But Absalom is a handsome, handsome man from his head to toe. 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom. And the daughter's name was, of course, what? Was Tamar. And she became a beautiful woman, named after her aunt. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face. So 2 more years go by, and then he never actually is reunited with his father David. Absalom, 2 years without seeing the king's face. When Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king. Absalom wants to see his dad. He wants to go to court. He wants to go to the palace. Joab refused to come to him. He sent a second time. Joab refused to come. Then he said to his servants, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine. He has barley there. Go set it on fire." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab did go to Absalom's house and said, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom said, "Look, I sent word to you and said, 'Come here,' so I can send you to the king and ask, 'Why have I come from Geshur? It'd be better for me if I was still there.' In other words, well, you wouldn't come when I sent for you, so I decided to burn down your crops. I knew that would get you here." Okay, they're getting more and more insight here at Absalom, because there's a part of us, there's a part of us that, we don't condone murder, but at the same time, knowing what an awful thing that Amnon did, what a piece of garbage Amnon was in raping Tamar and all. There's a part of us that felt like Absalom in getting revenge for his sister is somewhat justified. We would say, well, murdering somebody's never justified. That's revenge. That's not justice, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a part of us that takes a little bit of like, well, he had it coming. But we're going to see that Absalom is no prince in terms of his morality either. Absalom is going to show that he is not a righteous young man either. I can't get him to, I sent for him, he wouldn't come. Well, burn down his crops. That'll get him here. So he says, I'd be better off if I'd never left, my grandfather's house. Now, I want to see the king's face. If I'm guilty of something, let him put me to death. So Joab went to the king and told him this. And the king summoned Absalom, and he came in and bowed down with his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. So now everything's going to be great, right? Not at all. Let's read just a little bit more. Because this, again, in the course of time, because now Absalom has been allowed to have he's fully back. He's back at the palace. He's back with his father. Other than the time in exile, there's been no consequences for him murdering his brother. He's back. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He'd get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Well, your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or a case would come to me, and I would see that he gets justice." So, everybody that's coming to David, asking David to settle a dispute. Absalom, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Bixby. Oh, that's a great town. I love Bixby. What's your case? Well, blah blah blah. Oh man, I wish I was there to judge your case, because boy, you got a great case, but there's nobody there who's going to listen to you. There's nobody there who'd give you justice. Wish I was there, because if I'd have been there, boy, I would have definitely sided with you. I would have definitely taken your side. I definitely would have given you justice. Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take a hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way towards all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice. In other words, they'd start to bow down to Absalom as the crown prince. Hey, stand up here. Give me a hug. And so he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur at Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord will take me back to Jerusalem, I'll worship the Lord in Hebron." And the king, David, said to him, "Go in peace." And he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. And a messenger came and told David, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." And David said to his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he'll move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword." And so Absalom's now is, as I say, Absalom played the long game. Took him years and years to get to this place. But now, as he's wormed his way back in, his plan all along, my father did not punish Amnon for what he did to my sister. My father did nothing. And so he is going to overthrow his father. And just when we thought David had solidified his kingdom and David had, gotten to a place where he would, Saul is gone, Saul is dead, the Philistines have been defeated, his kingdom is increased, he's got himself a palace, etc., etc., etc. Just when you think he's kind of got things settled down, as he's getting older and older now, his son Absalom now has risen a rebellion, and David, the king, has to flee Jerusalem or he will die. So next week we'll find out what happens to that. And we will actually finish the book of 2 Samuel. So, what do you think of this turn of events? With everybody except his family. Yeah, but he has a blind spot. The history is full of I was going to say great men and women, but for most of history, rulers have tended to be men, with some exceptions. But there's history of a lot of, quote, great men who did great things in politics or warfare or anything else, and yet had, you know, had families that were in disarray. And, we don't live in a land of kings, but, there's a lot of politicians and celebrities and wealthy people and on who have done some great things in industry and finance and politics and everything else, and you find out that their families are in disarray. And yeah, Nathan doesn't seem to be in the scene anymore, does he? Yeah, I don't know that I can't remember, to be honest, if Nathan pops up anymore after this or not, but he's not a part of it right here. So, yeah. David's not listening to him, he's listening to Joab. And Joab has his own agenda, as we know. Joab has his own agenda, and Joab wasn't afraid to take the law into his own hands and commit a murder himself, of his rival general. So anyway, you think, well, I'm not sure how uplifting all this story is, especially in some of the really sordid details. If one thing it just reminds us of, David is lifted up as one of the great men of the Old Testament, and he is one of the great men of the Old Testament. But there's only one perfect person in the Bible, and that's Jesus. Jesus is the only perfect person. Every other person, including the heroic people, Moses and Abraham and David and any of the other Old Testament saints, they all had flaws. And all of the disciples, have flaws. And as I say, as much as I love Paul's 13 letters, when Paul and Barnabas get into an argument, I think Barnabas was the one I would have sided with. There's no perfect people except for Jesus. He's the only perfect person in the Bible. So no one else. We're all flawed, and that's why Paul, of course, calls himself the chief of sinners, given his own background. Peter fails miserably at the most crucial time, and on and on and on. So, fortunately, we don't worship any of those guys, or we only worship Jesus as the one who was able to live a sinless life and then give his life for our sins. So let's pray. Lord, we're grateful for just being reminded that all of us fall short, even great men like David. We all fall short. We all mess up. We all sin. Thank you that we can find grace and mercy and forgiveness just as he did. And help us each day to listen for your voice. We pray in your name. Amen.